Testing 1, 2, 3. There we go. We got that going for us, chat. Just Dante, what's up? Your dog, hello, Jessica Boggs, what's up? How do? Get that set up. Bunch of stuff we're going to talk about today, by the way. Bunch of stuff across the board. Put that in there. Dominic, what's up? Jackson, what's up? All right, yeah, we just got a bunch of stuff across the board that we're going to be talking about. Obviously, you know, chaos is just ensuming. It really is. It really is. But you know what? It is what it is. It is what it is. Let's see. Should we get into the tropical storm first, or should we get into the severe weather? I think we should get into the severe weather. Enhanced risk. Actually, it goes kind of hand in hand, the severe weather and the tropical weather. So, you know, we'll get to Cristobal in a second, but Cristobal is a main discussion topic of today's stream. By the way, I'm going to be going rapid fire, like, completely. I'm going to be, like, interchanging between tropical and severe weather quite frequently, which means that it will be limited to how much I can actually conversate with you guys a bit. I'll have specific parts to where I'll allow you guys to ask questions, stuff like that, for like specific forecasts or, you know, whatever. But, you know, there's just a lot of information for me to get out for you all today. And it's just going to be, you know, kind of rapid fire. Boom, 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 boom. I think Northern Virginia will get storms today. Probably. Good idea. Something like that. All right, let's go ahead and talk. 3 risks in general. All right, we'll get to the enhanced risk last because this one's kind of debatable as to what all it could do. But Cristobal, as we've mentioned, is going to be moving up in towards Louisiana, which, by the way, pretty proud that my prediction actually was true. It's going to hit Louisiana. A lot of people said it was going to hit Texas. A lot of people said it was going to hit Florida. No one else really kind of said specifically Eastern Louisiana. I mean, if you were here for my last stream, I said I didn't really want to make my opinions known too much as to specifics because people were going to be like, oh, you can't predict specific spots that far out. Well, I technically did, and shame on me for not saying my opinions sooner, making it vocalized, because I literally said it was going to hit the eastern part of Louisiana. And now here we are, everyone kind of is saying it's going to hit the eastern part of Louisiana. Huzzah. What more do you want from me? Anyways, if we just take a look at the tornado risk, massive tornado risk across the board here for the southern states. Louisiana, little parts of Mississippi, little parts of Alabama, going into Florida across the board, even in the Tampa and St. Petersburg area. Not quite over to Orlando, but, you know, there's stuff in and around there. Could definitely start to trigger stuff in and around those areas. Wind risk, mainly localized for Florida, mainly due to the fact that the outer bands are actually reaching those areas. It's not reaching the deep south quite yet, you know, the heart of the deep south, but it'll get there tomorrow, maybe later tonight, stuff like that. And then, obviously, no hail, no dice whatsoever, because there isn't really anything that's lifting anything up there. Fizzy lifting drinks. There is a marginal and a slight risk over here. This boundary that is continuously just kind of decided to surge on through. It's a bit more of a stationary boundary now that I look at it. It's kind of just like slowly moving off to the east. So, massive flood risk as that is down in the south, if you guys didn't already know, because tropical systems typically do bring a lot of rain and storm surge. But you know, massive flood risk for the mid-Atlantic going into the Northeast and New England and stuff like that. So that's something to talk about too. And then the giant risk over here for the Northern Plains. Big enhanced risk. Wind is hatched, 30% hatched, which 30% on its own means that you have a 30% chance of encountering conditions of winds over 58 miles per hour. And then the hatch risk is a 10% chance or greater of you experiencing winds over 74 miles per hour. I will say, granted it was up 5,000 feet up in the sky, there was an official report of winds, of a wind gust at 124 miles per hour. Granted, it's up 5,000 feet up in the sky. The elevation, of that place was 5,000 feet up in the sky, just to show you how intense the winds are in those upper levels. Quite insane. Do have to say so myself. Hail, 30%, mainly localized for South Dakota and a little bit of Nebraska. That'll be later into the evening. All the stuff will start to fire off right around actually now, and maybe even a little bit later. There are a couple cells that I've been watching on the models that have been, as well as the live radar, to see if they will sustain or not. The models say that there could be some sort of cell that forms and sustains, one singular cell. Of the location, models are a bit mixed, but as of right now, still, there's stuff that's trying to initiate, but the cap is too large, so there's definitely going to be a QLCS that moves on through, and that will definitely pose a tornado risk wherever it goes. But if there's a discrete cell out in front of this, and it actually sustains, breaks through the cap, you could probably see that large tornado that everyone has been not really wishing for, but been yearning for some action in the severe weather realm. Ever since Easter, it's been quite quiet, except for the EF4. The EF4 a week later, but, still. Everyone's been kind of waiting for some sort of large tornado risk in May and June and stuff like that, and we haven't had that in a while. So if something forms out in front of it, you could see some powerful tornado. So that'll be pretty interesting. If we take a look at the current conditions out here, actually, what we will do, we'll do regional. Regional is a whole lot better. You can kind of see low pressure moving in through Utah, going into Wyoming and Colorado, actually. You can see these kind of bands that are swirling up and around, and these bands could actually go ahead and produce thunderstorms along the line, and there you can even see a couple popcorn cells that are trying to maintain themselves as they move on through. This actually is what the HRRR said. The HRRR said that something was going to form right here in the heart of Nebraska. And I'm actually curious to see. There is the cell that they've been talking about on the HRRR. Whether or not this thing sustains, that is the main question. But it's still one of those things where as that continues to move on through, you could see something. And I've been saying in my my Discord server, which for some reason I just love to say whatever the heck I want in the Discord server, but not on YouTube. But if you do want to join my Discord server, link in the description down below. I said that if you can get any sort of cell that forms in the southern part of South Dakota towards the border of Nebraska, you're probably going to see that damaging tornado that I was talking about. So something in and around those areas, definitely something to keep in mind as that continues to move on through. But as of right now, it doesn't seem as if too much is happening. If actually I were to take a look at the actual cap inversion numbers, you can actually see a plethora of numbers up into the -100 to even -200 areas, actually right over where some of the cells are where the HRRR said there would be. So definitely something to keep in mind. There is a little bit that's less than 100 right here near the border of Nebraska and South Dakota. So as I've mentioned, if something can form right out here, push on through, you probably could see something, and that's when stuff will start to get dicey, chat. So, pretty interesting, say the least. It does seem as if it's around, say, -50 joules per kilogram. So, I mean, it'll be pretty interesting to watch as that continues to move on through, but something to keep in mind as that moves on to the north and east. Wisconsin's not going to get anything from Cristobal. They're going to get some sort of severe risk from another low soon, but that's a later day. We're going to focus on what's happening today and tomorrow. And as I mentioned, I'll open it up for questions in specific spots across the board. But as of right now, we are going to just kind of like truck on through, get as much information out as possible. So, something to keep in mind. Let's go on to Cristobal now. Cristobal, we'll go ahead and get sea surface temperatures out, as well as CMIS. Cristobal right now, according to the 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time advisory, The maximum sustained winds were at 50 miles per hour is a 994 millibar storm, moving north at 12 miles per hour, which if we actually get that's actually the warnings and stuff like that. We want the cone. There's the cone right there. So you can kind of see how the cone takes it towards eastern Louisiana and then out, posing a really interesting not only rip current risk, but you can get some storm surge numbers up to a foot, maybe even 3 feet near New Orleans, stuff like that. Just anywhere across the board, literally from Pensacola all the way over to New Orleans. Something that they do need to keep in mind, as there's not only going to be some gusty winds surging in from the outer bands of Cristobal, but some flooding could also occur within those areas too. So actually, we'll get the 3-day forecast here. You can kind of see right around noon, 1 p.m. on Sunday, you can kind of see that Cristobal, according to the National Hurricane Center, will actually be able to make landfall in near Louisiana. So that'll be something to keep in mind as it continues to move on through. But this is definitely something that people need to continue to monitor. Granted, it is a tropical storm. You do have to keep in mind all tropical systems, except for tropical depressions, bring a lot of rain. A lot of rain. And across the board, you're probably going to still want to take your precautions, get into higher ground. The winds aren't really going to be that much of an issue, unless if you live along the coast. But the coast, even then, they're kind of built for like hurricanes and stuff like that. So they should be fine. It's just mainly the storm surge and the flooding risk that people need to continue to monitor as that continues to move on through. Let's take a look at the actual tropical, the ensemble model guidance. You can actually kind of see that all the models are now hinting towards some sort of landfall just to the south and west of New Orleans, meaning that New Orleans will indeed continue to be the risk in and around this area. You could definitely see some sort of storm surge flooding risk in New Orleans. Something to keep in mind as that continues to move on through. And to support our theory even further, you can kind of see how the warm waters are kind of in and around this area, and it's just following up those warm waters all the way into those areas. Might actually stall a bit. It may not even intensify a bit furthermore due to the fact of some sort of cold pooling in and around those waters. So, granted, 27 degrees Celsius is still pretty warm. It's kind of warm. I mean, it's in that, half and half threshold where it could sustain storms, but it doesn't really want to, continue to intensify all the way through. But still something to keep in mind as that continues to move on through. Still, no matter what, New Orleans is definitely at risk for some sort of flooding. So something to keep in mind there. The Euro says that it's going to be a bit further west. The GFS actually says that it actually is going to be it's going to be due south of New Orleans, and then it turns off, which if that's the case, you can still see some pretty gusty winds in and around the New Orleans area. So definitely people around there need to keep in mind this storm could continue to move on through. It won't really be all too powerful, won't be like any sort of hurricane, but it will definitely pose some sort of storm surge flooding risk, as I have mentioned before. I'm not sure if there is any sort of storm surge watch and warnings. All right, let's see. I'm pretty sure if they put this up, definitely some sort of storm surge warning in and around those areas. So that is going to be pretty interesting. Hello from New Orleans. Thank you for updating the storm. Yep, no problem. No problem. I would love to see a storm surge warning graphic, but apparently doesn't want me to. Righty, very nice. Apparently I can't see any of that. So let's just go into what could possibly be happening, the forecast for storm surge. So you definitely could see some large storm surge numbers if you're east of New Orleans. If you're east of New Orleans in any of the suburbs around there, not sure if it's populated whatsoever. It probably is. You could possibly see some sort of storm surge numbers up to around 3 feet above ground level. So something to keep in mind around there. as I've mentioned, massive storm surge risk across the board. I know New Orleans metropolitans have their own precautions to take on the flooding risk across the board. But if you live around New Orleans, definitely something to where you guys are going to want to take your precautions, as this could get pretty dicey if you aren't prepared for any of this. Let's see. The rainfall, this is a forecast rainfall for what all is going to be happening. So, as you can see, plethora of rain, over 6 inches around in the New Orleans area. And then you can kind of see, if you go further to like Tallahassee, maybe even all the way over into Jacksonville, you can see some numbers from 4 to 6 inches in and around that area. So, it'll be pretty interesting, to say the least, as to how much rain these areas will be getting. But still something to keep in mind across the board. Definitely some sort of flooding risk, especially as I've mentioned, near the Louisiana and Mississippi area around New Orleans. And then some of the outer bands, which is actually causing the tornado risk over in Florida. That could pose some sort of gusty winds and some torrential rainfall events across the board in those areas as well. Let's see. I do want to go ahead and take a look at what the satellites are saying on this. Let's go ahead and take a look at the intensities. We'll also take a look at what the hurricane hunters are saying as well. We'll be able to decipher what all they are saying. Granted, as I've mentioned, I'm still learning a bunch of stuff when it comes to tropical storms. So eventually you'll get more, which also leads into something that I want to be talking about later. Even after this, we'll actually go into the live analysis after this current analysis of Cristobal. We'll be talking about all the severe storms across the board in the U.S., and we'll be talking about what all is actually happening within Cristobal. But we'll actually take a look. See, here is Cristobal. I'll actually zoom this in for you all, so you guys can actually see. Definitely, you can see these outer bands swirling in and around Cristobal. I did mention about a week ago, something like that, I mentioned 3 hypothetical situations, all right? This is obviously done hypothetical situation number 1, but one thing I did mention with hypothetical situation number 1 is that it would be a large tropical system moving into the Gulf. And here we are, giant armbands off of Cristobal across the board, going into even parts of North Carolina. You can see some showers from over there too. Absolutely large rain bands from this thing. Definitely you have an area of low pressure down and around those areas. And then the satellite also mentions that it is around 42, 43 knots at the surface. With a higher pressure than what the hurricane hunters may have found, but still something to keep in mind in and around those areas, something that could continue to move on through. The reason why the bands are actually all the way up in South Carolina and North Carolina is due to the fact that there is a lot of strong shear. You can see these lines, the reds, the yellows, and the greens. The greens indicate favorable shear for hurricanes and tropical systems and stuff like that. The yellow is kind of the half and half. It doesn't really allow it to strengthen, but it doesn't really kill it either. So it's just kind of, that gray area where it just sustains itself. And then the reds kind of just rip the thunderstorms away from the actual low pressure system, so that will eventually weaken tropical systems. One thing that I do want to tell you all, that I always had kind of this theory, is that everyone kind of overhypes the impacts as to what wind shear brings to tropical systems. When it comes to tropical storms and tropical depressions, it's a big factor across the board when it comes to it trying to develop thunderstorms around the center of low pressure. Due to the fact that it can't get organized, doesn't really want to sustain itself, and it kind of just like rips it apart, becomes subtropical. But obviously, because there's a bunch of favorable shear around the center of low pressure, the actual tropical storm would be allowed to sustain itself. However, the arm bands that this actually produces, as I've mentioned, kind of gets pushed off into specific areas. And that kind of goes into how the thunderstorms kind of get pushed away from the center of low pressure. So it kind of just gets pushed off, and you can see it actually gets pushed off all the way over to, if I take the intensity away, you'll be able to see, it gets pushed all the way over into South Carolina and stuff like that. So something to keep in mind across the board, that this will continue to, it will provide rain across the board as to everywhere in the deep south. So a lot of intense shear. Now, one thing I will say, going back to the point I made as to how impactful shear is, for hurricanes, it doesn't really matter all too much. It will just try to deplete thunderstorms, move it away. It'll weaken it little by little, but it will still be at the intensity of it as it usually would be without thunderstorms. So something to keep in mind around there too. It'll just generally be weaker. If I show you all the sea surface temperatures, as I've mentioned, pretty decent temperatures across the board. It'll just kind of be trying to follow through with the warmer temperatures that I've mentioned before. Showed you all that earlier. So nothing really too much to talk about there. Let's get into actually, we can go into what the hurricane hunters are currently seeing right now. And you can kind of see they just dispatched another aircraft reconnaissance plane, NOAA 3, mission number 7 actually, that is heading into the center of low pressure into Cristobal. So it actually went through some of the outer bands. It is trying to move on through. The latest one actually finished. So they did have one that moved on through Cristobal. Now it's currently finished. They're actually heading back towards Mobile. That was the Air Force 306 and around that area. That'll be, so that's kind of done and over with, but we can actually kind of see what all they were searching for and around those areas. And you can actually also see, this is all at flight level. So all these wind bars are what winds they were dealing with at flight level. So you can see how the pressure was at 993 millibars. It is now steadily increased to the 995 millibar region, meaning that it could have might have actually weakened a bit, which honestly I'm not too surprised about due to the fact that there's a lot of wind shear kind of moving the outer bands further out and away from the center of low pressure system. So the actual eye is, the thunderstorms around the eye is actually sustaining, but it's not getting any more thunderstorms to wrap in and around. So it's kind of just these thunderstorms in itself that have been forming around the actual center of low pressure system. So something to continue to monitor, but it does seem as if it isn't really as strong as it was. Let's actually take a look at what the soundings, or actually the winds around the surface are. You can kind of see there were some around the surface that went up to 40 knots, which would be around 45 miles per hour, give or take, but nothing really too much other than that. It doesn't seem as if they were getting a lot of dice as to whether or not this thing was intensifying. I do want to take a look real quick. I want to take a look at some of the soundings that they have. So we'll take a look at number 13. We can see that at the surface, winds were at 17 knots, which is actually kind of bleh. So that's something to keep in mind. I do want to take a look at one of the eyes. So 14, there was that. And actually a really nice eye profile here. You can see how the humidity continues to move on through. The temperature, pretty nice. The pressure, it's decent. It's doing its own little thing. But definitely a calm eye around the center of low pressure system. Not really too gusty in my honest opinion. I do want to take a look at 15 as to what all they were looking here. Okay, so there was some winds up to 21 knots. That's 25 miles per hour. So it's not that bad, but it still tells me that this thing is kind of weakening due to the fact that it isn't getting as much thunderstorms from the outer band off near Florida. So this could sustain at a 50 mile per hour tropical storm, maybe more, maybe less, but I guess we'll have to see. As my chat has mentioned, we have a tornado warning for Albany and Carbon counties in Wyoming. That'll be in effect until 3:30 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. This will be actually moving off to the north at 70 miles per hour, so absolutely racing speeds moving off near the interstate of I-80. That'll be eventually heading off to the McFadden area near State Route 13. So people over there need to go ahead and take their precautions. Let's actually get some timings out for them. This will be absolutely going mental. So McFadden be impacted within the next 5 minutes. If you live in McFadden, or if you know anyone who lives in McFadden, Wyoming, you need to go ahead and tell them to take their precautions. Get underground and get into the lowest innermost part of your building, particularly a bathroom or a closet with no windows, so you can put as many walls between yourself and the tornadic rotation as possible. So, something to keep in mind. The thing about QLCS is that they could actually spin up real quickly. They are very unpredictable to actually predict. I just said unpredictable, and then they are very unpredictable to predict. Seems legit. But they are very unpredictable, so you can't really tell when they will actually happen. You just have to be prepared whenever they do arise. So, people over there, even across the board in all of these risks, this could potentially, anywhere along the line, could turn tornadic. There's already been hazard of 70 mile per hour wind gusts. There was actually some of 90 back in Utah. As I mentioned, that there was actually some reports of 124 mile per hour wind gusts. So something to keep in mind. This is a dangerous QLCS that will continue to move on through into the hazardous risk area known as Nebraska and South Dakota. So something to keep in mind as that continues to move on through. People need to continue to take their precautions as that continues to move on through to the north and east. We'll actually take a look at the risks across the board. I do want to see if anything else is formed. We'll actually take off the capping inversion. There actually is some storms that are trying to develop in Nebraska, stuff like that. So I actually do want to take a look and see how successful those cells are in actually developing. Could be something in around there. Honestly, but I guess we'll have to find out as to the intensity of these storms. Nothing really too much in my honest opinion. Stuff is trying to form, but nothing really too interesting. I guess we will have to see for ourselves as that continues to move on through. By the way, I guess this might as well, people might as well go ahead and ask any questions that you may need, whether when it comes to specific forecasts or what's happening with Cristobal or what we will be seeing within the future. I've got an entire list of stuff that I'm going to be talking about, and actually I might as well just write a Google Doc about it so that we can continue to go on through like a script, you know. So we'll just kind of cycle on through, be able to do that for ourselves. So let's see, we'll talk about tropical storm Cristobal. And also, I do want to mention, I will be getting a new layout real soon. So this face cam, I know you guys love the face, stuff like that. But new layout, it'll be pretty cool. The radar will be a bit smaller, but it will have a lot more information as to what all is happening. So we'll have a bar down at the bottom, literally going through all the different risks and stuff like that. Basically, I'm basing this idea off of how the Storm Channel had their setup in and around 2011, 2013, 2014 years. They still kind of have that same setup today, but I'm just basically putting my own twist to it. So I'll have all different stuff. It'll be pretty cool. Actually, as a matter of fact, I could give you all a little sneak peek. Nah, I'll give you all a sneak peek later. Baby cell merch, that'll be coming up later. Whenever I actually have the money to actually create baby cell merch. But we are creating it. We are creating it indeed. I do want to mention that there is a really nice donut hole presentation here on Radar. Something to keep in mind. Really interesting rotation here heading near McFadden. So, something to keep in mind. Cristobal. Current status. Let's take a look at all the stuff. Would I allow people to call this a bust? No, I would not allow people to call this a bust. Is the subtropical jet still a contributing factor, or could there be something else? No, the subtropical jet is still a factor. That's the reason why all the thunderstorms are kind of being pushed off towards the towards South Carolina and stuff like that. Do I see Louisiana getting hit badly at any time of this year? Well, if you want to count this Cristobal, then yeah, you probably could. Cristobal's probably going to hit you guys like a truck with a bunch of rain. If you live near the coast towards the east of New Orleans, you probably could. So that'd be pretty interesting. For Tuesday, do you think there could be a chance of severe weather up in the parts of the northern plains? No, I do not. I do not believe it will be in the northern plains. I actually believe it will be around the Arkansas, Texas area. You could be seeing some stuff in around those areas for some severe weather. But other northern plains, not really. Not a lot of dice, in my honest opinion. I mean, you could, but not where these areas have been in the past. It'll be slowly, the boundary will be slowly moving off to the east, and it'll kind of elongate itself as it continues to move on through. Radar's not showing strong rotation, but no warning. It's doing its stuff. It's doing its own thing. It's having a whale of a time, must say. By the way, if you guys are new to the channel, feel free to go ahead and leave a like, subscribe, and share with people who might be interested. Also hit the bell for whenever I am live. I tend to do this more often than anyone else, even if there's someone else who is trying to stream more than I am. I don't know. I don't know anymore, chat. I don't know. I've got some ideas, though. Is there still severe weather in New England? We had some bad thunder earlier. There was, but not anymore. You guys are fine. My honest opinion, you guys are fine. Current status, track, warnings, actually we'll go risks, stuff like that, and then we'll go severe weather, boom. Mini supercells in Florida? Yes, indeed. Across the board there actually is. It's all along that line. It's all along that line. What time in the U.S. radars pick up on Cristobal? Probably in the morning tomorrow. Probably in the morning tomorrow. Sometime in the morning. It'll be actually making impact along the coast of Louisiana at around 1 to noon. Something like that. Central Daylight Time. So I intend on streaming when that happens. Okay, so the rotation near McFadden has actually weakened a bit. It's turned a bit more into a gusty wind threat, but still you could see some sort of spin up in and around near McFadden. Wouldn't be surprised if something of the sort happened, so. Think Cristobal will flood Lafayette? That's a good question. Lafayette is kind of near the, 2 to 4 inch caliber, so you could see some aerial flooding, but honestly not really too much. Lafayette should be okay. You could see some aerial flooding though across the board, and even in spots that aren't near New Orleans and in Louisiana, you could see aerial flooding across the board in these areas too. You know, from as far south as Tampa, St. Petersburg, all the way to as east as Orlando and Jacksonville, all the way to as west as maybe even Lake Charles, if you want to start, you know. If you want to stretch that far. You could go further east and say Lafayette. But across the board, massive flood risk, especially from Tallahassee all the way over to Jacksonville, and then the New Orleans metro area, in and around that. People need to continue to monitor. I wonder if I can actually see the storm surge. I can't see it. This is so stupid. Alrighty. Well, luckily, this is an experimental peak storm surge forecast graphic, which actually I kind of like. So from Morgan City all the way to the mouth of the Mississippi River, you can see an upwards of 2 to 4 feet storm surge. And then, as I mentioned before, from the mouth of the Mississippi River all the way to the Ocean Springs area, which is basically in and around the New Orleans area, I mentioned that you guys could get impacted heavily by storm surge. The National Hurricane Center is actually saying that you could see stuff in upwards of 3 to 5 feet. And then Pensacola, all the way down to basically Marco Island in Florida, you know, down to Mexico Beach. If you guys know where that is, you guys most likely know where that is. Tampa Bay, stuff like that. 1 to 3 feet storm surge due to the fact that the bands are just kind of like swirling in. Large arm bands actually from the Cristobal tropical system. So something to keep in mind. Flash flooding potential actually is a little bit of a moderate across the board, especially going up from the Mississippi River down towards Little Rock, stuff like that. But as I mentioned, New Orleans most likely is going to be the main area to watch. That'll be mainly from tonight into tomorrow morning, going into tomorrow afternoon, stuff like that. You guys will definitely be able to see stuff with all of that. Working on your hurricane season OBS scenes. Oh, I'm going to be having so many scenes for so many different things. It's not even funny. I've got like a bunch of stuff planned. I'm going to be trying to make my own graphic and stuff like that, but it'll be pretty interesting. I am me, what's up? Well, what should New Orleans New Orleans expect? You're probably going to, depending upon where you live, all right? If you live in the actual metropolitan area, I know you guys have your precautions and stuff like that when it comes to flooding. Your levees, obviously. You know, they do their thing. I know they're kind of like bleh, but, you know, they still kind of do their own thing. However, you guys could still see some rain, some flash flooding across the board. As I've mentioned, 6 to 10 inches near New Orleans of rain. And obviously, you know, you guys have seen worse, but for tropical systems, you know, it still brings a lot of rain across the board in those areas. So, you know, you guys will see definitely a lot of rain. And then storm surge, as I've mentioned, 3 to 5 feet storm surge if you live near any parts of water, like say not Lake Charles. Is it Lake Charles? I don't know the actual geography. See, this is what happens. Let's look it up for ourselves. I only know one geography, and that's West Virginia and Pennsylvania and Maryland and a little bit of Virginia. Let's see. No, Lake Pontchartrain. My God, I've been to New Orleans before, and I couldn't even remember what Lake Pontchartrain was. I'm so mad. Anyways, point being is that if you live near Lake Pontchartrain, maybe the Mississippi River area, in and around there, you guys could potentially see some sort of flooding risk due to this. And even afterwards, a hidden risk, if you will. All right, a hidden risk is that Cristobal kind of just goes up the Mississippi River. It kind of does. And that will continue to create flooding risks for not only the area of where Cristobal impacts, but downstream in the Mississippi. Hidden risk right there is that anywhere you could be seeing some flooding impacts in Louisiana even after Cristobal is gone. Even after it's gone, you still could see some flooding risks for maybe a week. Stuff like that. All the way up until Tuesday, where you guys get another round of severe weather that kind of pushes through your area. The extent of the severe weather, kind of half and half. It'll probably be more of a wind risk, but, you know, there's still a couple of days. It could always change. What's going to happen to Mississippi? Mississippi, you'll see some, depending upon where you are in Mississippi, you'll see rain. Just basically rain. Not really a lot of gusty winds, although there will be an interesting tornado risk. I will say, the tornado risk around here, due to the fact that the subtropical jet isn't around that area, crossovers are kind of just a bit wonky, so you could have some quick spin-ups along the lines, kind of similar to how QLCS is moving through all that area, so it's going to be pretty interesting. Yes, this thing, I know, it does have a tornado warning. I also know that it's kind of dead. You can kind of see the greens moving towards, the reds moving away. Right in the middle is where the rotation would be, but it is quite broad right now, so the tornado warning here for Wyoming, I believe, has kind of spun itself out. But yeah, it's pretty interesting to say the least for what all is happening with Cristobal. Yeah, Pontchartrain. Yeah, you guys can bully me if you want. East, your mom's Oak Harbor, north shore of Lake Pontchartrain, 3 to 5 storm surge won't be a threat to her. Okay, good. And just in case, you guys probably are going to want to take your precautions anyways. And yes, I know New Orleans doesn't really have a very good levee system. I know that much. It's basically what is it? Top 3 in the worst levees in the United States, next to Baltimore and I don't know. I think New Orleans is number 1. But like Baltimore, that area is terrible too. I know that for a fact. I mean, it's crazy. But as I mentioned, you guys are definitely going to want to continue to monitor that heading off through. I want to take a look real quick at the satellite of the severe weather in the northern plains, due to the fact that, for the guys who are new, Cristobal isn't the only thing that we're going to be talking about today. There's actually some severe weather that could be impacting across the board. Jeez, I might as well just do this then. There's Cristobal. So you can kind of see Cristobal doing its own thing. Forecast cone, you can see, as I've mentioned, for the past week, it'll hit eastern Louisiana, and everyone was like, oh, we don't know where it's going to hit. I need to say, I need to say my opinions, like, just speak it out more often, because, obviously people are going to be upset that I'm making, specific predictions so far out, but you know what? They've been pretty consistent as of late, and it's making me build confidence, so it's been pretty nice. During quotations, Hurricane Barry. Like nearly topped the levees, and the storm wasn't even that severe. Yeah, it wasn't. It really wasn't. But, anyways. I'm gonna die to life jackets. Thanks for the stream. Got to run sub, so check back when the weather gets more interesting. Yep, no problem. I'll even be streaming tomorrow when Cristobal actually makes landfall and stuff like that. So if you have anyone who wants to come around and watch the stream, feel free to share. But thank you for coming out. I really do appreciate it. Another stream from the road. It's fun to watch. Have a good stream. Thanks, Lux. For you guys who didn't see like a week ago, I also live streamed me storm chasing. That was fun. Caught some wall clouds and stuff like that. That was pretty interesting. Obviously, I have no barriers when it comes to my actual storm chasing, so viewers' discretion is advised for all that. But actually, very nice low here that's continuing to spawn bands after bands after even bands, just across the board. A bunch of different areas to watch. This line right here is something that I'm going to continue to watch. These storms in Nebraska that'll be moving off into South Dakota. Something that I'm going to continue to keep an eye on. This could turn tornadic if it breaks the cap. The cap right now is quite hefty, and it is limiting these storms from actually turning into these like classic supercells. So something to keep in mind is that continues to move on through to the north. But as I've mentioned, not just Cristobal that is impacting the U.S. You can see there was actually a severe risk for the mid-Atlantic to the northeast that was actually moving on through earlier. You can see Cristobal is causing risks for severe parameters, mainly tornadoes down there. As I've mentioned, the outer bands are very similar to how QLCSs are. They can create these quick spin-ups along the line. And then the giant enhanced risk for the northern plains. You can see wind and hail. Actually, the wind is a 30% chance. Just if it was a 30% chance without the black lines, that would be 58 mile per hour winds and greater that you could expect just a 30% chance that you get that. And then the actual hatched, which is the black lines and stuff like that, the transparent black lines, I should say, that is a 10% chance or greater of winds greater than 74 miles per hour, which, to remind for any of you who are new to the stream, there was a report of 124 mile per hour wind gusts in Utah earlier today. So something to keep in mind, that the winds are definitely intense. Granted, it was up 5,000 feet up in the sky. That was the elevation of where they took that. It was actually in a town. Wasn't really precisely on a mountain per se, but it was actually, it was somewhat elevated. But the winds, just wanted to let you guys know, are quite intense. The hail, 30% chance, which means you'd get a 30% chance of experiencing an inch-sized hail, which is quarter or greater. And then the hatched is 10% chance or greater of you experiencing 2 inches and above sized hail. So really interesting to say the least across the board, these risks. And as I've mentioned, still that 5% due to Cristobal, and then there's a giant 5% risk in South Dakota. You guys will be seeing that later on in the stream. Just as to what we mean by that 5%. There could even be some sort of risk down here near Nebraska if these storms break the cap. As I've mentioned, if something decides to break the cap along the border of South Dakota and Nebraska, that will probably have the greatest risk of producing stronger supercells, stronger tornadoes, stuff like that across the board. So people need to continue to monitor that. If I remember correctly, there was an aircraft that was being sent to Cristobal, and indeed, it actually is almost there to Cristobal. So there is, as we speak, a hurricane hunter that is actually being moved off into Cristobal. So we'll be actually giving you guys some live analysis of what all is happening in there as to what all they're experiencing. So something to keep in mind going on through the stream. We'll actually talk about Cristobal now as to the track and what all the current conditions are for these areas. But you all can kind of see, if I go on to the infrared, you can still see how large Cristobal actually spans. You can see arm bands spanning through from Guatemala, actually, near Mexico, all the way up into Florida, even up into South Carolina and North Carolina. These arm bands are actually spanning quite broad, quite large, and that's due to the fact that if we go over to the shear real quick, you can see how these red lines indicate some unfavorable shear for tropical systems. So what this shear has been doing is it's been pushing all the thunderstorms that have been from these outer bands away from the center of low pressure near Cristobal. So all these thunderstorms have been pushed off towards Florida, near Georgia, Alabama, stuff like that, as I've mentioned, all the way up into South Carolina. And it hasn't really been allowing Cristobal to intensify due to the fact that the thunderstorms haven't been able to push in near the center of low pressure system. So something to keep in mind, it's just mainly just been the thunderstorms that have been circulating near the eye of Cristobal per se, but it doesn't seem as of right now there is a lot going for Cristobal as of right now. If we go into, actually, we can go into an animated GIF real quick, actually. I feel like that'd be a whole lot better. Yeah, there it is. Look at how that thing is actually pretty nice to look at. I'm not going to lie. Do you think there can be a water spout with the storm in the Chesapeake? What's happening in the Chesapeake? Real quickly, because that's very close. Well, not very close, but that's somewhat close to my home. Yeah, there could be. There could be. But not exactly the dice that I'd be looking at. Denver right now is actually being impacted across the board, so that's something to keep in mind. But anyways, this GIF's quite nice, actually. You can see how thunderstorms are now starting to reinitiate along the line. That'll be impacting parts of Cuba, not exactly near the Havana area, but that'll eventually be moving off towards Tampa Bay, probably later tonight if these thunderstorms do sustain. There's actually some more thunderstorms that are actually developing around the center of low pressure area. So there could be something that could indicate some sort of intensification from Cristobal due to the fact that it is developing some sort of thunderstorm characteristics, maybe even an eye wall per se. But still something to keep in mind as that continues to move on through. It'll be something that we all need to continue to watch as that moves to the north. As I've mentioned, the sea surface temperatures, these are somewhat live. This is quite recent, but you can kind of see how the temperatures a bit lacking in some spots, which may indicate that there could be some sort of sustainment as it moves towards Louisiana. If it does get to around 60 miles per hour and sustained winds, then it will probably stay like that as it continues to move on through. But still something to keep in mind as that moves on. All the models now indicate that it'll be impacting somewhere in the eastern portion of Louisiana. When it comes to specifics, depends upon where, but something to keep in mind as that continues to move on through. We have a new tornado warning for Polk County in Florida. That'll be in effect until 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. This will be just the north and west of Davenport, to the north of Lake Alfred, basically to the north and east of Lakeland, Florida, which actually, now that I think about it, this is quite close to Orlando. So something to keep in mind. People around Disney, if you live around those areas, could eventually be heading off in your general vicinity. Actually, I believe Disney's around Lakelands. I can't remember. But something to keep in mind. If the radar would load for us, we'd be able to actually show you what all is happening. But as of right now, it does seem as if the radar just refuses to load at the moment. I'm trying to get this up for you all. Oh, goodness me. All right, there we go. So there's the rotation right there. You can see the reds are moving away, the greens and grays moving towards. Right in the middle is where the rotation would be. And as that continues to move off, it'll be kind of paralleling the US 27 area. So if you know anyone who lives along US 27, you need to go ahead and take their tell them to take their precautions. Or if you live around there, you need to go ahead and take your precautions. Get underground and get into the lowest innermost part of your building, particularly a bathroom or a closet with no windows, so you can put as many walls between yourself and the tornadic rotation as possible. The thing about these cells here, these popcorn cells, is that they have their own little kinks and stuff like that, so they could continue to possibly produce tornadoes along the line in and around these areas. So something to keep, something that people need to continue to take their precautions as that continues to move on through to the north. So you'll basically see this all the way throughout the evening, and just kind of these like cycling of like more cells that kind of pop up, these popcorn cells that move through in Florida, and that'll continue to move on through all the way, maybe even into the morning, depending upon the speed of Cristobal. But you'll definitely see another round of cells moving on through later in the evening. So something to keep in mind as that continues to move on through. I wish I could see the Tampa Bay radar right now, but it does seem as if it is kind of okay. There we go. We got the latest from the Tampa Bay radar. Definitely some sort of rotation there. You can definitely see the reds moving away, the greens moving towards. So there could be something around there. If I take a look at the correlation coefficient to see if there's any sort of debris signature, I do not see one as of this moment. However, that does not mean that it won't produce a tornado along the way. It definitely could. And so people around there need to continue to go ahead and take their precautions as it continues to move on through. As I've mentioned, all of these cells could continue to produce tornadic rotations across the board, so people need to continue to also monitor that. Even if you aren't in a tornado warning, you definitely could be in one later this evening. I do want to take a look, see if there's any sort... There isn't a tornado watch down for Florida, but I definitely believe there could be later on. That could be in effect. If I were to issue a tornado watch, that probably would be in effect until, say, 2 o'clock, maybe 3 o'clock in the morning, something like that. So definitely something to where people over there need to continue to take their precautions as that continues to move on through, due to the fact that storms along the outer bands of tropical systems could continue to produce these quick little spin-ups and actually hamper other people's livelihoods. So do believe that there could be, but as of right now, don't believe that there is anything else. I mean, there definitely could be. I will tell you this. All right, out of all these storms, I'm telling you that none of them are stronger than any other. I mean, maybe the tornado warning, but let's put it this way: any of these have tornadic potential. Any of them. This could go tornado warning. This could go tornado warning. This one could go tornado warning. All of these cells could go tornado warning. All of them. So, you know, the thing when it comes to you know, me trying to predict severe weather when it comes to stuff along the outer bands, it's similar to a QLCS. You can't predict it because anything across the board could do it. So, something to keep in mind. Something to keep in mind. Is Georgia going to get storms? Maybe eventually, but nothing really like too big. We'll actually go into the convective outlook for tomorrow. You can actually see that a 5% chance of tornadoes have been issued for the New Orleans area, even up into Gulfport, Mississippi, which is pretty interesting. So something to keep in mind. Large tornado risk due to the fact that the bands are kind of just swirling into that general vicinity, which is kind of the reason why New Orleans has kind of been my hot zone for as of late. I've just been kind of informing people that New Orleans is probably going to be impacted the worst out of all the areas, even with the severe weather. So it'd be something to keep in mind. And that includes the 5% chance of tornadoes up near up in the northern plains. Now, the thing about it is that is a bit harder to forecast. This pretty easy to say that there could be storms across the board. When it comes to specifics, very hard. This, pretty hard to say anything. It's similar to how it is today. There's still a bit of capping to where if, stuff could not form and it would just be a wind risk. It's very difficult to say for myself as to when stuff could pop off, when stuff could get intense. So, I guess we'll have to see. Let's take a look and see if the aircraft reconnaissance mission is actually in Cristobal right now. So yep, now it is actually starting to go into Cristobal. You can actually see the area of low pressure right here. So it is now starting to kind of make its turn towards the eye to see if there is any sort of pressure drop in any sorts of these areas. You can also see the developing thunderstorms around the northern parts, the northern half of Cristobal. Both the northeastern and northwestern quadrant has now decided to have now produced thunderstorms. I actually do want to take a look and see the mimic imagery of this just to see the actual development of Cristobal. You can see outer band across the board, and now you can kind of see how it's starting to produce some sort of thunderstorms towards the northern part of the northern half of Cristobal. So it's pretty interesting to see from all of this as to what all is going to be happening specifically. If it can actually produce more thunderstorms on the northern part, you can definitely see more impacts across the coast. Stuff across the board could be actually impacting in and around those areas. So something to keep in mind as that continues to move on through. But, definitely something to where people need to continue to take their precautions. Is Cristobal a tropical storm? Yes, it indeed is a tropical storm. As of right now, Cristobal is a 50 mile per hour, 994 millibar tropical storm moving north at 12 miles per hour. So, let's take a look at the forecast advisory of what the Storm Prediction Center, or not Storm Prediction Center, my goodness, the National Hurricane Center says. So, as it continues to move on through, it says that sustained winds could get up to 50 knots, which would be around 60 miles per hour per se, something like that, and maybe 50 miles per hour, depending upon the strength of the winds. And that'll continue to sustain until it actually moves inland, where it starts to deplete. So it does seem as if the National Hurricane Center says that it will probably stay at a 60 mile per hour storm. It might intensify as that continues to move north, but still something to continue to monitor as that continues to move on forward to the north at 12. Let's see. There is, by the way, just to mention, it's kind of a relevant thing here as of right now because obviously Cristobal is, the main focus. But there is some sort of tropical disturbance out in the Atlantic. Do want to mention this won't impact the U.S. whatsoever. It will not move over there. It'll just kind of like sit here and stuff will move on through. However, I am watching a tropical system that could try and potentially brush up the coast, potentially, depending upon where it moves from the actual boundary. But there could be something that forms off of here and then kind of just brushes off the coast. Could be some sort of impact for North Carolina. There could be something that forms around here. If you want a specific time and date as to when that could form, that would be, I said the 15th through the 17th, which is next week. Oh, not next week, but 2 week, kind of a week and a half from now. So Monday the 15th through Wednesday the 17th, you could potentially see something across the East Coast. Something could form off of here, move off to the north, or something could like form right here, move towards Bermuda, stuff like that. But something ends up forming in this general vicinity. So just wanted to mention that. I do take a look at the models practically every single day, so something has kind of trended towards something something forming in and around that area. So people do need to, you can take my words with a grain of salt if you wish, but that's my honest opinion. Something could be across the board and around there. We have a new tornado warning. This is actually a bit more serious now since this is actually heading towards Orlando. So this is for Orange County. That'll be in effect until 6:15 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Definitely some sort of velocity signature indicating a really strong rotation. This is actually starting to get pretty serious now. I wouldn't be surprised if this thing actually ends up producing a tornado later. I did mention that across the board you could see cells, these popcorn cells that could continue to produce. So as I've mentioned before, definitely something that people need to continue to take their precautions. This will be moving over Interstate 4 in about 5 to 10 minutes. So people over there need to go ahead and continue to take their precautions. If you're under a tornado warning right now, you need to go ahead and take your precautions and get underground, get into the lowest, innermost part of your building, particularly a bathroom or a closet with no windows, so you can put as many walls between yourself and the tornadic rotation as possible. If I were to get a delta velocity of this, to be able to show you all the intensity of this thing, this is 80 miles per hour. So this is 102 mile per hour delta velocity, give or take, something that people need to continue to go ahead and take your precautions. This will be eventually impacting near Interstate 4, around the Williamsburg area, around the State Route 528 area. So if you live around those areas, you guys need to go ahead and take their precautions and get to your safe space. If I were to take a 3D of this just to see what all we're actually dealing with on a actual meso level, you can kind of see a bit occluded, but there is some sort of inflow notch. You can kind of see the arc that I would typically look for if I were to actually take a look at the ISO surface. You can kind of see not really too much there. Let's see if I can get something better for you all. There is the inflow notch right there, the typical arc that I would look for where the inflow is unimpeded into the storm. This is not particularly unimpeded, but there could be something in and around those areas that could potentially move on through. So people need to go ahead, continue to take their precautions as that moves on to the north. So people around Orlando, you guys need to go ahead, take your precautions. As of right now, I do not see a correlation coefficient drop or debris signature, just for the fact that if I were to outline that, you can kind of see how the lighter correlation coefficients, or the lower correlation coefficients, I should say, are kind of over in the inflow notch. However, that does not mean that it could not produce a tornado along the line. It definitely could, as all of these storms could possibly do that, for the entire day along these bands along Cristobal. So people need to continue to monitor that as that continues to move on through. As I've mentioned before, you can definitely see reds moving away, the greens moving towards, and right in the middle is where the rotation would be. The normalized rotation actually is above 1.5, which usually when you start to get into the green, I start to pay attention, and it actually gets up into the yellows. So yellow is something to where I'm starting to kind of get concerned a bit. And now there is a new rotation scan, and this definitely is starting to kind of organize a bit, if you will. I wouldn't be surprised if this thing starts to attempt to try and make its way towards the ground, if you will. So definitely something to where people need to continue to monitor this. This definitely is inflow dominant, so this could kind of sustain for quite some time. If you live near Williamsburg, along Tangelo Park, and along State Route 528, along State Route 482. If you know anyone who lives there, or if you live along in those areas, you need to go ahead and take your precautions now. Get to your safe space. This thing could produce at any time in any way, shape, or form. So you guys need to go ahead, heed the warnings, take your proper precautions. This will be just to the east, or just to the west of Orlando International Airport. You can see how the airport is right here, and here is the actual rotation. So people need to continue to monitor that as that continues to move off. I'm quite curious to see if there is actually any sort of radar around in Orlando. There actually is, so I'm actually curious to see what this looks like here off of this radar. But base velocities show there is some general rotation, just a little bit. You can kind of see how the greens are moving towards, the reds are moving away. So right in the middle is where there would be some sort of rotation. I don't really see any sort of correlation coefficient drop in and around those areas, but definitely something where people need to continue to monitor that. And one thing that I did not anticipate, actually, is the threat for some hail. Now, apparently, because it has developed its own little supercellular structure, it has now actually had an updraft to where it could sustain hail. So there actually is some hail values, some maximum expected hail size values of over 3/4 of an inch. So something to keep in mind as that continues to move on through. But if you live near if you live near Williamsburg, if you live near Tangelo Park, near Dr. Phillips, I'm quite surprised, no offense, but I'm quite surprised that's the name of a town. But anyways, State Route 528, State Route 482, even State Route 435. You guys need to go ahead and take your proper precautions, as this will be heading off towards your general vicinity. So as I've mentioned, this will be heading off to the west of Orlando International Airport. You can see as I circled, that is Orlando International Airport. This is the storm that is going to be moving off into the Orlando metropolitan area. So people need to go ahead and continue to take their precautions as that moves on through. On the larger scale, as I zoom out here, you can see all of these popcorn cells, as I've mentioned about 15 minutes ago, that all of these could potentially turn tornadic. It isn't just the one that's heading near Orlando. It could be one near Lakeland, could be one near Brooksville, stuff like that. And this will continue to move on through into the evening. More lines will continue to move on through and surge and continuously produce these possible tornadic rotations embedded with these little popcorn cells that this outer band from Cristobal is producing. So something to keep in mind as that continues to move on through. It's not just this one near Williamsburg, heading off into the Orlando metropolitan area. Stuff across the board in Florida could continue to possibly produce tornadic rotation. So something to keep in mind as this moves on through to the evening and into the morning hours into tomorrow. So as of right now, just by taking a look at the risks, I don't really see. I got a new scan here. There might be some sort of lowering, might be some sort of correlation coefficient drop, but as of right now, I do not believe that that would produce. I do not see anything on spectrum width that is telling me that it is. It has some sort of lowering, so I do not believe that there is something on the ground right now. But as I've mentioned, that does not mean that won't produce a tornado along the way. It could very well weaken, but it could also very well intensify, and that is the unpredictable nature of what tornadic cells could bring. So something to keep in mind as that continues to move on through. I still see delta velocities. If I were to put a marker right here, still see delta velocities near 90 miles per hour across the board. So definitely one of those things where people need to continue to take their precautions as that continues to move off to the north. So what am I using? This right here is GR2 Analyst, and the pen product that I'm using is Epic Pen. Epic Pen is free. GR2 Analyst, however, is not. If you wanted to use a free trial, however, you don't have to enter any of your credit card information. It's a 21-day free trial that you could use, and then you could just, ditch it. But it does cost $250. So if you are interested in this product, you would have to cough up that much money, stuff like that. Let's see. ZDR says that there is some sort of updraft characteristic, kind of supporting the idea of some sort of hail in and around this area. Actually, you could get hail in upwards of almost an inch according to this. So that's something to keep in mind, is that could potentially produce some risks out in front of the actual tornadic rotation. So really one of those things where people need to continue to monitor this as that moves off to the north. Something that people need to continue to kind of, keep in mind, that you'll get the rain, obviously, you'll get the hail, and then at the end of it, you could possibly see even something tornadic. So you won't be able to see this unless if you're on the eastern side of the cell. And even then, you won't be getting as many impacts. It's mainly the people who will be impacted out in front of this. And these things are also, one thing I do want to mention, they are moving decently slow, but at the same time, usually when it's closer to the actual center of low pressure, it tends to get a lot quicker. So because of the fact that it is quite far out from the center of low pressure, it is moving somewhat slow. So you could possibly even see some sort of flooding risk across the board if it continues to produce that much rain. And that's the same thing for all these other cells. It'll be continuous bands of rain moving on through. You can actually see there's a flash flood warning for Marion County in Florida. That would be in effect until 8:45 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So just these unhidden risks that I do want to mention could potentially bring some sort of risk to life and property in and around those areas. Give me a couple seconds. So, yep, as I do want to mention, this will be continuing out all the way into the morning, and even then, that'll transition into the risk of what all is happening tomorrow. One thing, gosh, I wish that I had my scenes up. I do want to show you guys so badly what all I have in store for you all. I have a lot of scenes set up to where it's basically a bit more organized and it's a lot more informational. So the best way that I can do that for you all is by creating a scene. The radar would be a bit smaller, but I'd be able to give you all a lot more information across the board as to what all is happening. So something to keep in mind, but as I've mentioned, with this storm, you need to continue to take your precautions. This is just to the west of Williamsburg now. I'm not saying that Williamsburg is out of the risk right now, but something to keep in mind. If you know geography around those areas, definitely something to keep in mind. I'm now starting to see, chat, a little bit of a correlation coefficient drop. Something to keep in mind. This could possibly be ending up trying to produce a tornado now. Trying. And that's not good. So if you know anyone who lives near Tangelo Park or Oak Ridge, Dr. Phillips, along State Route 435, along 482, tell them to take their precautions. Or if you are watching this, you need to go ahead and take your precautions. And if they need a visual aid, feel free to send them to my stream so that I can show them specifically as to what all is happening. There is definitely some sort of possible correlation coefficient in and around this area to where people need to continue to take their precautions. I'll take another delta velocity, and actually, it's a little bit below 100 miles per hour. I'd say around 97 mile per hour delta velocity. So people around there need to continue to take their precautions too, as that continues to move on through. We have a new tornado warning for Pinellas in Florida. That'll be in effect until 6:15 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. I do want to take a look real quick, see what all is happening here. It's just basically a water spout that was, not really. It was over land a little bit. Could potentially, produce something, but a lot of a gusty wind threat here. So clear water should be all right, but it could intensify along the line. So something to keep in mind as it continues to move on through. And as I mentioned before earlier in the stream, there probably should be some sort of tornado watch for Florida due to the fact that all of these storms, especially with the outer bands, it's basically like a QLCS. You won't know until it is actually happening. These cells that can continue to kind of pop up and continue to produce tornadoes across the lines. So something to keep in mind through all the way into the morning, that people need to continue to monitor this. So as I mentioned, Orlando is going to be impacted by a cell that is currently tornado warned. Could possibly, probably the western, the western part, the western metropolitan area. Continue to monitor that. New scan just came in. Kind of looking really interesting now. You can see on reflectivity, you can see that kind of hooking nature. If there's a correlation coefficient, there is still a little bit of a correlation coefficient, so there might be some sort of swirling occurring in and around here, maybe some sort of rain-wrapped characteristic, and I do believe that it indeed is somewhat rain-wrapped, maybe even not really hail-wrapped, I'd say, but you could still see something in and around those areas, some general rotation with a little bit of a lowering on this side, so there could be some sort of rear flank downdraft being wrapped into the actual hook. Something to keep in mind as that continues to move on through. But I don't think that there is a tornado on the ground as of this moment. I do believe that this still has tornadic potential, however. So if you live on the western suburbs of Orlando, Tangelo Park, as I've mentioned, along State Route 482, now State Route 91 is now in the mix of this, State Route 435, you guys need to go ahead and take your precautions, as I've mentioned before. This will be eventually crossing over Interstate number 4 in about 5 minutes. So if you live along there where it starts to kind of curl and head towards Orlando, you guys need to go ahead and take your precautions too, as well as even past that near Orlo Vista. Those areas, you guys could be seeing some risks in about 20 minutes. So people around there need to continue to go ahead and take your precautions as that moves on through to the north. So something to keep in mind, this is going to continue to move on through, and this is, as I've mentioned before, these popcorn cells in and around this entire outer band of Cristobal will continue to kind of produce a bunch of different tornadic rotations across the board, and it is very difficult for us weather enthusiasts and even meteorologists in the Storm Prediction Center and the National Weather Service and the National Hurricane Center for them to actually predict as to the specifics of what these storms could actually produce. One thing I do want to mention real quick is that this might be gusting out a little bit more. You might be having some sort of gusting characteristic in and out behind the cell. So something to keep in mind as it continues to move on to the north. Could be seeing some gusty wind threat, but as I've mentioned, you probably could see some torrential downfall out in front of the rotation, a little bit of hail, maybe some gusty winds, and then even at the end, possibly some sort of tornadic rotation later in the storm. Gary D. Goss, thank you for the subscription. I really do appreciate it. So yeah, as I mentioned before, just continuous rotation from the storm. And as I've mentioned, even if when the storm was a bit kind of weaker before, prior to the scans that we have seen right now, I still believe that there could be some sort of tornadic rotation in and around this area, and definitely you could still see something in and around there. This is now right over Tangelo Park, so I've mentioned before, if you lived in those areas, you need to get under your shelter. Now this is we're now starting to look towards the Orlo Vista in the Orlando area. So if you live along I-4, Interstate 4, along State Route 91, you guys need to also go ahead and take your precautions. Oak Ridge, definitely something that people need to continue to monitor. If you live in and around Oak Ridge to the north of that, even if you're paralleling around State Route 435, if you're even east of that, you need to go ahead and take your precautions, get into your safe space, because you do have some sort of tornadic rotation heading off into your general vicinity. So something to keep in mind. I'm even seeing some outbound velocity values of 72 miles per hour. So something to keep in mind in and around across the board. People need to continue to take their precautions. I'm going to quickly take a look at the tornado warning for Clearwater, Florida. The last time I checked, there wasn't really a lot of rotation per se. as to the intensity of the actual storm, and I do believe that it indeed has kind of seeded a bit. Still some sort of rotation. You can definitely see greens moving towards the reds moving away. Right in the middle is where the rotation is. This is the base velocity, by the way, if I did not make that clear. So you can definitely see some sort of general rotation here, but nothing really too interesting in my honest opinion. I do believe the actual risk, the one that is the stronger one, is more towards Orlando. So something to keep in mind as that continues to move on through. Definitely see the greens moving towards the radar, the reds and oranges moving away. So something to where people need to continue to monitor that. This is now headed off to the north and west of the Orlando International Airport. So as I've mentioned, Orlando, the international airport itself, is fine from this risk, but now as that continues to move on through, it is now about to cross over the Interstate 4 vicinity, so people need to continue to take your precautions in and around those areas. I'm seeing some sort of lowering from the Tangelo Park area, so you could possibly be seeing some sort of funnel action, maybe some sort of rear flank downdraft being pulled into the actual cell, but there could be something that's trying to form off of this, maybe some sort of lowering per se, and definitely showing on here could be definitely some sort of rain wrapping high precipitation based cell moving through. So something to keep in mind, that if you're trying to find where this storm is, where this tornadic rotation is, you won't be able to see due to the fact that you have a lot of rain out in front of it. You have not as much hail anymore. As a matter of fact, the maximum expected hail size is kind of seeded a bit, so not really as much of a hail risk anymore for this. You'll definitely see some sort of gusty winds, and then you might even see a tornadic rotation out behind all of this actual cell. So as I mentioned, this will be off to the north and west of Oak Ridge. If you live to the around State Route 435, just to the east of that, you guys need to go ahead and take your precautions as that will continue to move on through. Good to hear, Douglas Crosby, that you are not being impacted by the cell. However, I do want to mention that there could still be cells later in the evening that could continue to form in and around. You could possibly even see some tornadic cells that could impact you later in the evening. So something to keep in mind. Even if you aren't directly impacted by this cell, you could be impacted later in the evening. So something that I did want to let you know that there could be something in and around those areas. Is Pasco, Florida safe? 2 seconds as I look up as to where that is, which, by the way, I do personal forecasts for people, so if you guys do want me to look up specific areas as to where stuff could be going down, if you wanted to see if stuff is fine, then feel free to let me know. I could do forecasts for you all, and even if you want, if it's just as broad as, say, where is Cristobal now, or where is Cristobal going, I could definitely let you in on as to what all is currently happening. And when I mean currently, I mean currently. There's hurricane hunters in and around Cristobal that could be, that are telling us right is where all the stuff is happening. Okay, so when it comes to if Pasco, Florida, that's the actual county. As of right now, you do have popcorn cells. There could be some rotation embedded in and around those areas. Honestly, as of right now, you guys are fine, but you could see something along the line later. So something to keep in mind across the board. The public reported a funnel. Yep, so as I mentioned, there could be some sort of lowering in and around that area. Something to keep in mind, that there could be something that is pushing on through in and around those areas around Oak Ridge and the Tangelo Park, which kind of proves my point as to, if you guys weren't here prior, I mentioned that I'm pretty good at analyzing live weather, so I'm definitely your guy if you ever want any sort of live analysis. New York State Tammy Parish, we lost power already. Where do you think the eye will be? Personally, if I were to, actually, I do want to take a look. I already have my ideal location as to where Cristobal will actually impact. I actually do believe that it'll be impacting around the Port Fortune area as well as the Grand Isle area. I think those areas will probably see, if not the eye wall, stuffing around those areas. So people need to continue to kind of like take their precautions, but definitely something to where, yeah, it's quite unfortunate that you already lost you already lost your power. We do have a new tornado warning. The former tornado warning has been canceled. There's a new one. There actually might even be another one that forms out in front of north of this. So this is for Sumter County in Florida. That'll be in effect until 6:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. I'm so used to saying Central Daylight Time due to the fact that all the severe weather events are always over towards the central areas. But as of right now, you can definitely see a classic little comma head signature here on reflectivity. The velocity shows the kind of reds and oranges moving away, the grays moving towards, and right in the middle is where the rotation would be. Take a look at the normalized rotation. You can actually see that there could be, there's definitely some sort of rotation in there. Correlation coefficient shows that there isn't a tornado debris signature as of right now. However, it is looking up 4,000 feet up in the sky, so it's very difficult for me to tell as to what all is happening right within those areas. Another tornado warning, basically an extension for the other tornado warning in Orange County. That is going until 6:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Now into the metro area of Orlando. So something to keep in mind around there, that there is definitely cells across the board that could be forming in and around there. And I still said that this storm could be tornadic. It definitely is still tornadic in and around that area. So something to keep in mind. Definitely a lot of rain in and around the rotation. So there could still be something there, but you can't really see it due to the fact of how high precipitation based it is. So something to keep in mind that people need to continue to monitor this. You can see this is the base velocity, so you can see the reds and oranges moving away, the grays and greens moving towards, and right in the middle is where the rotation would be. So this will be basically paralleling the State Route 435 area. As I mentioned, around the Orlo Vista area could be seeing some of these impacts. Now, since they are in the tornado warning, they should go ahead and take their precautions. Get underground or get into the lowest innermost part of your building, particularly a bathroom or a closet with no windows, so you can put as many walls between yourself and the tornadic rotation as possible. So something to keep in mind as people need to continue to monitor this. This will continue to move off to the north at 20 miles per hour. There isn't really as much of a hail risk as there was before. There was a report of a funnel on this. A National Weather Service employee had a family member that reported a funnel from this. So this has indeed continuously produced reports of funnel clouds in and around those areas. And I wouldn't be surprised if it actually produced a tornado in and around down near into those areas. So something to keep in mind. Spectrum width, as I do want to mention, is showing that there could be some sort of lowering around that area. Could be something, but definitely not really too strong, or at least not as strong as it once was. It did have a delta velocity of around 100 miles per hour. Now it is around 80 miles per hour, which is very much so a good thing. Maybe even 70 miles per hour. So something to keep in mind. Not as strong as it once was before, but it definitely could still be tornadic along the line. So people should not take this storm lightly. Definitely should take it seriously, as these storms in and across the board could possibly see tornadic rotations. As I've mentioned, very similar to how a QLCS is. These kind of popcorn cells kind of form across along the outer band, and they kind of just produce these little embedded rotations in and along the line to where people could continue to see tornadic conditions across the board. Real quickly, what I do want to do, I'm going to take this over. Actually, you know what? This is why I wish that I had my scenes up. This is exactly the reason why I wanted it. But we'll reveal that later. We'll reveal the scenes later in the whenever the next risk is after tomorrow. But the hurricane hunters are actually going into Cristobal now. So you can kind of see this is the path that it's taken. You can see how that around here is the mouth of the Mississippi. And you can kind of see how the hurricane hunters have already taken their path. They're heading straight for the eye of Cristobal right now to see what the current pressure is, and as to the stronger winds along the new formed eye wall on the northern side of Cristobal. So something to keep in mind as that continues to move on through. Cristobal, definitely something to where people need to continue to monitor. That could intensify into a 60 mile per hour sustained storm. Going back to the storm over in Orlando, it is definitely still there. it is definitely still making noise, and it is definitely still rotating. It's not as strong as I mentioned before. And as a matter of fact, the spectrum width has kind of died out a bit. This could be turning into a bit more of a gusty wind threat, maybe some sort of downdraft event happening out in front of the rotation. So something to keep in mind. Could be dying out a bit, but there's still, as I mentioned before, you won't be able to know if you're trying to look for it out in person. You're going to see a lot of the rain, you're going to see the gusty winds, and you won't see the tornadic rotation until it is literally on top of you. So something to keep in mind as that continues to move on through. Let's see. Trying to see what more I can talk about this. I do not see a correlation coefficient on this storm, but still something to keep in mind. If you live near Orlo Vista, as I've mentioned before, along State Route 408, along State Route 50, near the Pine Hills area as well, you guys will be eventually directly impacted by this. So as I mentioned before, Orlo Vista, you should already be in your safe space. Now Pine Hills I am including in that safe space. You guys should definitely go ahead, take your proper precautions as that continues to move on through. Local news in Clearwater doesn't believe tornado ever occurred here either. Yeah, I don't believe that there was anything around there, just possibly a brief spin up, maybe a funnel across the board that could potentially be producing in and around those areas. So something to keep in mind, but as of right now, doesn't seem as if it is too big, too hot to handle. Let's see. I'm trying to see if there's anything here that I could do. Nothing really too much. Still a lot of rotation here, though. Red's moving away, green's moving towards. Right in the middle is where the rotation is. I do want to real quickly. The other tornado warning has been canceled. It has weakened a bit, so that is the good news. I do want to real quickly. For the guys, if you guys are new, Cristobal isn't the only risk. There is also a massive severe risk for, not as much for the Northeast anymore. The Northeast is kind of done. The central to northern plains near the Rockies have a decent tornado risk today. And it's actually a bit of a gamble right now. So what I'm trying to see is if there's any cells that actually form out. Ooh. Overshooting tops right here. Something might actually be forming. What I will do real quick is I will close out and then open 2 tabs of GR2 Analyst. Just so I'd be able to like interchange between the two. But yeah, you can definitely see the broad area of low pressure. Give me a second. Let's get actually the windows here. So we'll do that. We'll have that go on here. And then we'll have this go on that. Have this go on that. Boom. So this, Windows, me trying to fix all of this. Okay, so there is actually a severe thunderstorm warning for that area. So that's kind of interesting. And then this, actually we can close this tab out for now. So yeah, we've got our tornado warning over near Orlando. I do want to take a look and see what this cell is doing. So let's take a look at the cell near South Dakota. My goodness, look at that. The echo tops have absolutely exploded here. And now we've got thunderstorms in upwards of 53,000 feet. That right there, chat, in itself is mental. Nick, biceps. It's been a while since you've been on the stream. How do? I mean, this cell is absolutely blown up. And this right here is what I've been talking about the entire time. If this thing actually sustains itself, chat, you could possibly see that strong tornado that I was talking about. So something to keep in mind, this thing could eventually do something. It already has a maximum expected hail size of 1 inch. For those of you who are asking as to where this is, as of right now, this is just to the north and west of Sioux Falls. And definitely one of those things where this thing has absolutely exploded within the past few minutes. Definitely could see something in and around there to where people need to continue to monitor this storm. Definitely something to keep in mind. Waiting on Cristobal, got your beer and a nice porch to watch the storm from. Okay, good. That's good. You definitely could see something, some sort of flood risk, but other than that, you guys should be fine. Strong storm in Virginia. I mean, there isn't really too much. There is a little one, but it's not a good one. So, South Dakota, definitely something to where people need to continue to monitor. Orlo Vista, as I've mentioned, there is still some sort of rotation in around there. I told you guys to go ahead and take your precautions. Now, the Pine Hills area is probably going to get impacted now. So if you live in Pine Hills, I mentioned before that you probably should go ahead, get into your safe space. Definitely are going to want to do so right now. Don't see anything when it comes to the correlation coefficient. Spectrum width shows that there might be some sort of lowering in and around this area, but honestly, it probably isn't too strong enough for it to actually go down and might produce some sort of funnel activity, but it is high precipitation based, so you wouldn't be able to actually tell until the thing is actually over you. So a lot of rain, a lot of gusty winds. You might not even see the tornado until, as I mentioned, it is right over you. This is not a correlation coefficient drop. This is not a debris signature. The reason being, right there, you can kind of see how it's off to the side, not really in where the rotation is whatsoever. The rotation is right near here, near Orlo Vista. If I circle that, go to the correlation coefficient, nothing really there indicating a tornado debris signature. Something to keep in mind there. I mean, my goodness, this cell is absolutely exploded, and it's already got the classic characteristic, chat. I wouldn't be surprised if this thing goes tornado warned soon. I wouldn't be surprised, chat. It's starting to arc. Chat, it is starting to arc. And that's not good. Whenever you see that, when it comes to severe weather, that is not good. And it is already starting to do so. Here we go. So that is something that people need to go ahead and take their precautions. Cooper W, thank you for the subscription. I really do appreciate that. My goodness, this is definitely something that people need to go ahead and take their and monitor, because this is starting to ramp up a bit. This is what I feared. I feared the most, that if something forms in and around South Dakota near Nebraska, it will probably explode. And here we are. We already have a cell that forms out in front of the line that is already trying to form tornadic characteristics. So that is not good. What are you losing your mind over, Morgan? One thing I will say, it is going mental, though. South Dakota is now starting to kind of blow up a little bit. And that is not good. So, something to keep in mind. Going back to Orlando, however, definitely could still see something there. Really weak rotation now. As a matter of fact, it's kind of depleted a bit. It's more turned into a scattered thunderstorm